Good evening and welcome to the 2022 Lieutenant Governor's Debate. Live from South Carolina ETV Studios in Columbia, I'm Gavin Jackson. Joining me tonight to question the candidates is Skylar Croft of the Post and Courier. With Election Day less than a month away, we are joined in studio with the two candidates running for Lieutenant Governor. They are running on the same ticket as the candidates for governor. And they are incumbent Republican Pamela Evett, who is running with Governor Henry McMaster, and Democrat Tally Casey, who is running with former 1st District Congressman Joe Cunningham. Before we begin tonight, some ground rules. Each candidate will have the opportunity to make a 1-minute opening statement, and from there they will have 90 seconds to answer the questions. And we drew names when the candidates arrived for starting order. And Tally Casey, we will start with your opening statement.
Thank you, Gavin. Good evening. My name is Tally Parham Casey, and I was born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina. From an early age, I wanted to be an F-16 pilot. I applied to the Air Force Academy, but I was told that it was actually against the law for women to fly in combat. 6 years later, Congress repealed that law, and I went on to become the first female fighter pilot in the state. After serving 3 tours of duty over Iraq, I came home to start my family and become CEO of a statewide law firm. After fighting for freedom abroad, I never thought I'd have to come home and fight for basic freedoms here. But Henry McMaster wants to ban all abortions without exceptions for rape, incest, or the life of the mother. Joe Cunningham and I want you to have more freedoms, not less. We want to eliminate the state income tax, give teachers the pay raise they deserve, and we will protect a woman's right to choose. I'm Tally Parham Casey, and I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor Evett.
Good evening. Thank you to SCETV for hosting this debate here tonight, and thank you all for tuning in. I'm Pamela Evett. Over my career, I have held many titles, businesswoman, and most recently, Lieutenant Governor. But the best title that I hold is Mom. I'm very proud of the accomplishments of Governor McMaster, myself, and our team over the last 4 years. We've made South Carolina better for our children and our children's children. I'm proud that we signed into law the largest tax cuts in South Carolina's history. I'm proud that we eliminated state income tax for veterans' pensions. I'm proud that we've given our state law enforcement raises across the board. I'm proud of the way we've defended our natural resources here in South Carolina. And I'm proud of the way Governor McMaster and I led the state through COVID-19. I'm proud that U-Haul has actually ranked South Carolina number 4 in U-Haul drop destinations. I'm proud to be your Lieutenant Governor, and I hope that you will give me the honor to hold that title for 4 more years.
Lieutenant Governor Evett, the first question goes to you. The powers of Lieutenant Governor and even governor in our state are extremely limited. But if you had the ability to craft a new abortion law for the state, what would it look like?
Well, you know, in 2021, we passed a bipartisan heartbeat bill. We all proudly signed that bill. That bill is something I stand behind. I think that works well for the people of South Carolina. What definitely concerns me is that in 1992, Bill Clinton talked about safe, legal, and rare. And our opponents just months ago were celebrating inside of abortion clinic. If you go onto their website, they actually tell people how to go get an abortion. And even more disturbing to me is that they advocate for abortion, 2 months past what the medical community says is pain tolerance for a baby in the womb. I think that's a little bit radical.
We'll go to Tally for your question. How would you craft an abortion law in the state?
Thank you, Gavin. I think it's very important that we protect women's right to choose in South Carolina, and we should be leading on this issue. South Carolina is looking to establish one of the most restrictive bans in the country. If it were up to me, I would go back to the precedent set by Roe v. Wade, which was the law of the land for the past 50 years. Our daughters should not have less rights than their mothers and grandmothers. I think that what is happening is the other side here is just engaging in fear-mongering. We are not seeking to permit partial birth abortions or abortion on demand. We're just seeking basic freedoms for women to have the ability to make healthcare decisions within their own control or with consultation with their doctor. We don't think it's the government's job or the government's business to tell women what to do with their bodies or to tell doctors how to treat their patients.
So Tally, the next question goes to you. If the current law on the books does take effect, women will not be allowed to get an abortion after 6 weeks. That's around when an embryonic cardiac activity is detected, except for limited exceptions. What measures do you propose to improve the health outcomes of mothers and children when outcomes like infant mortality are already below the national average in our state?
Thank you, Gavin. We are experiencing a health crisis in this state. We don't have expanded Medicaid, and so there are about 200,000 South Carolinians who don't have access to basic health care. And a 6-week abortion ban means that a woman does not even have the opportunity to know that she's pregnant and to even seek an abortion. I know when I had my two children at 6 weeks, I didn't know that I was pregnant yet. And the restrictions on abortion for rape, incest, and the life of the mother, those are meaningless. It means that a woman who is raped has to undergo a 6-hour, extremely invasive examination, making her body a crime scene. It means that a woman who is a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault has to face her accuser. It means a woman who is in a relationship that is abusive. It means that she may face additional dangers when she gets home. Improving the lives of mothers here in South Carolina not only include access to adequate health care, reproductive care at her choice, but also expanding Medicaid so that South Carolinians who don't currently have coverage will have access to that.
Thank you, Telly. Skylar, you have the next question.
Let's switch to education.
Oh, sorry, Lieutenant Governor. Did you not rebut?
I was wondering if I was going to get a chance to talk
Happens
about
every
that.
debate. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Gavin, you know, as I said, I'm a mom. And from the very first day I found out I was pregnant, it was my job to keep my children from feeling pain. And so I think we have to really focus on one thing that our opponents are talking about. The medical community says that a child in the womb feels pain at 15 weeks. They're advocating, as she just said, for Roe Wade, which puts abortion at 20 weeks. That's 5 weeks that a child can feel pain, that they're advocating for that. That's horrific to me. That's horrific to the people of South Carolina. You know, there's a lot of other outlets. We have amazing free clinics here in our state, and I have visited most of them, 26, I think, to be exact, that provide medical attention and treatment to women all over the state for a variety of conditions. I mean, you know, you have neurologists that sit in these clinics, so we're not talking substandard care by any means. The governor and I were very forward-thinking when we thought Dobbs would be overturned, and we put an adoption summit into place. Because what we want to do is give women options that they can use without going to an abortion clinic. We think that's good for the mental health of women, and that's something that when I testified in the Senate I talked about. Something that's not talked about very much is the mental health of the women that undergo these procedures.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Did you want to follow up or rebuttal on that?
What the Lieutenant Governor is advocating for is not a pro-life position, but actually pro-birth. And in South Carolina, the governor is abandoning these children at the womb. We have one of the highest infant mortality rates. We have one of the highest maternal mortality rates. And the impact is most severe on our minority population. A Black woman in South Carolina is 3.5 times more likely to die after giving birth than a white woman. It is not the government's role to go into a doctor's office and tell a woman and her doctor what to do with her own body. That's just simply not the role of the government.
Let's go to education for a second here. And driving around the state, what have you learned that the state is not doing to retain and put qualified teachers in these districts where there are just vacancies? And if you had the power, what plan would you invoke to turn that around?
Lieutenant Governor.
So the governor and I are very pro-choice, but I do want to back up for 1 second. I am not just pro-life in the womb. I'm pro-life in the womb. I'm pro-life when our children need to walk safely down the street. And I'm pro-life when women feel afraid to walk alone at night. So to clarify that, I'm pro-life all the way through life. As far as education, the governor and I are very clear that we stand behind school choice. We believe that money should follow the child and that parents should guide the decisions. It's not just their right, it's their responsibility to make sure their children get educated properly. Coming out of business and business being my background, I feel very strongly that when you have a lot of options, the whole ship rises. When there is competition, whether in business or in education, I read an article just recently that said that some of the best public schools in South Carolina are in areas where there are abundance of charter schools and an abundance of private schools. I think that's the way that we make sure that our education continues to grow and thrive. This is not cutting edge. You look at states that have huge increases in test scores, it's because they allowed school choice and voucher systems into their state.
Those also would be in schools with heavy populations. How would you see that work in low-income areas?
Well, I mean, you have right in Charleston, you have Meeting Street Academy. That was all aimed at low-income families and children. And those children are performing well above grade level. A lot of it is parent interaction. The governor said it perfectly in his State of the State. We don't need to take parents out of the classroom. We need to get parents back in the classroom.
And Tally, your response to that question?
Yes, thank you, Skylar. I understand why she avoided the question at first, because the governor simply does not have a record on education. We have some of the worst schools in the country, and that's deplorable. And I'll start with the business case that Pam brought up. How can we recruit new businesses? How can we recruit the businesses that we have here in South Carolina if we don't have an educated workforce? And to answer your question, Skylar, from the traveling around that Joe and I have done around the state, we have heard from a lot of teachers. Joe has sat down with many teachers, and I've talked to many at the events we've done, and heard that they're working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, in addition to buying their school supplies. Now, we want to make sure that teachers have the ability to teach, that they're not overburdened by standardized testing, that they have adequate paid parental leave. The teachers were not included in the 6-week state parental leave bill that Henry McMaster just signed. And we want to make sure that our public schools are fully funded for the first time. They haven't been fully funded since the 2007-2008 school year. Since my first child was born, he's now in high school, we haven't had public schools that are fully funded. Joe Cunningham will be an education governor for once. We have been endorsed by the South Carolina Education Association and SC for Ed, and we are ready to help teachers on day one.
I think it's unfair to say that the governor doesn't care about teachers. I've heard the ads from Joe Cunningham and Tally Casey talking about how in the next 8 years, should they ever get this seat, that they would want to raise teacher pay by $10,000. Well, Governor McMaster in 6 years raised teacher pay by $10,000. And what he's trying to do is bring transparency to how schools are funded. And the last bill that was passed definitely puts money into the classroom and to the teachers, and not in middle management and the bureaucracy that revolves around our school districts.
Tally?
I'm very glad.
Next question, sorry, not a rebuttal, just the next question. We don't rebut rebuttals, sorry.
Oh, okay.
She was rebutting your statement earlier.
All right, gotcha.
Critical race theory is a concept not taught in K-12 schools in South Carolina, but lawmakers have spent hours debating this and finally put a stop to it coming through a budget proviso. Do you fear that this kind of action will have a chilling effect on how history is taught in South Carolina?
Skylar, the discussion about critical race theory it confuses me, because critical race theory is actually a legal concept. That's a class in law school. And so, no, I don't think it's appropriate to have critical race theory taught to K through 12 students. But I think it's really, even talking about it at this point is fear-mongering. It's not something that's happening in our schools. I don't think it's something we need to worry about. But we do think it's important to focus on the curriculum that's taught in schools. There's a place for curriculum and not for activism. But I do think that we need to be giving teachers support, not more restrictions on what they teach, but helping them, giving them the space, allowing them the creativity, and giving them the support that they need so that they can help our students.
So critical race theory is something that has brought a lot of letters and phone calls into our office. Teachers have talked about the fact that they're uncomfortable with some of the curriculum that's being taught, and parents have brought it to our attention. So to say that it's not happening in our schools, I don't think it's a fair assumption because it's coming to us actually from the ground. I don't think anything should be taught in a school that alters history. I think what we talk about is that, if history isn't taught properly, history tends to repeat itself, right? We've heard that over and over again. And I think it's really unfair to make anybody feel bad about parts of them, their heritage, or their culture that they were born into and cannot walk away from.
So, Lieutenant Governor Evatt, we have the next question to you. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. The Violence Policy Center recently ranked South Carolina as 23rd in the nation for the number of women who have died at the hands of men. That was 41 who were killed in 2020. Our rate, though still high, improved since the state was routinely in the top 10 and even number 1 for several years. What more needs to be done to fix this problem in South Carolina?
Gavin, thank you for that question. As a woman and the mom of a daughter, these are all things that I think about at night. The governor, when he was Attorney General, did a lot to advocate, clearing the dockets of judges so they could hear domestic abuse cases. We need to make sure that we support women. I have proudly supported the Julie Valentine Center in the upstate, and to hear the stories of women over and over. We want to make sure that women feel empowered, that we give them options and we give them safe landing pads. So that's what we need to do. All of us collectively need to come together and create an environment where women feel empowered. We need to make sure that they feel safe and that their cases are heard expeditiously, because we hear over and over again that women show up in court. Sometimes they sit all day, other cases get thrown in front of them, and then they end up having to go home and sometimes never returning. So I think just changing the way that our court system is handled, we know that that's not always easy because our court system is overworked.
Tally, your response?
Domestic violence is a problem, and I think I'm very happy to hear the Lieutenant Governor is working on that, and that certainly should be a bipartisan issue and something that we can agree about. And I'm all about doing the right thing without worrying about who takes credit for it. I do think that one thing that will help women in these situations, and having talked to the General Counsel of the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, we know that giving women access to health care, giving women access to reproductive care can help them get out of bad situations. Again, when women are in dangerous situations, when they have an abuser or an intimate partner who commits violence against them, or if they have a forced pregnancy, they need to be able to take care of themselves without having to drag law enforcement into it or having to subject themselves to the invasion of their privacy that goes with having to report the abuser. And so here again, I think that reproductive freedom is an element of protecting women from domestic violence.
Tally, next question for you. Overdose deaths from opioids hit a record in 2020 with 1,400 deaths in our state, and anecdotal data suggests that 2021 will be even worse. Despite this, state funding for treatment and other services hasn't kept up, though drug settlement funds are sending millions of dollars to our state. What is your message to those struggling or affected by the opioid epidemic, and how can we fix again this in our state?
My message to those who are suffering from that is, I hear you, and I sympathize with you, and I empathize with you. This is a tough problem, and this is something that we definitely need to face. One part of our platform that I believe addresses this issue is the legalization of marijuana, medical marijuana, as well as recreational marijuana. But in this case, it offers a safe alternative to these dangerous and addictive opioids. And what it also does is it eliminates the waste of taxpayer money as well as police resources in pursuing nonviolent criminals. We need our police forces to be empowered to pursue violent criminals, to get them off the street, and also eliminate the impact, the disproportionate impact that our laws have on minorities. A black man in South Carolina is 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than a white man even though the usage rates are the same. And so I think that in addition, veterans are suffering not only from PTSD and pain, but injuries that we cannot see. And the opioids right now are the only legal alternative for them to treat their pain. Again, we've heard from veterans on the campaign trail who say they want an option to treat their pain, and legalizing marijuana will offer them that treatment, that option.
Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, so, all I can say is if you are suffering from opioid addiction, please get help. It's not something that just impacts you, it impacts your family and your community. But let's be clear, how are we ever going to stop opioids from hitting our streets when we have an open border? President Biden has opened our borders to allow, drugs to enter into our country in unprecedented amounts. And everything we do here, everything that we continue to fight for and try to help, programs that we bring to whether it be our veterans or people who are suffered it through an injury, no real fault of their own, will go to the wayside if we can't control Biden's failed policies at the border. I mean, we hear our law enforcement talking about record amounts of drugs, especially fentanyl, getting into our communities. You talk about, our law enforcement having to really double down and be worked twice as hard when you have drugs coming into your state in record numbers. You hear from parents who are scared to death that their children can be exposed to this. We heard a report in the upstate of children actually, parents finding them unconscious on their bedroom floors while parents are in the living room watching TV, having no idea what's happening right under their own roof.
Thank you. Scott.
Governor Abbott, do you believe there should be age-related term limits for elected officials like there are for judges in our state? Why or why not?
So I know this has been a big topic of conversation at the Joe Cunningham campaign. My mother will be 94 years old this month, and she would take offense to thinking that anybody would want to put an age limit because she could run circles around people half her age. I think it's really unfair to try to lump people together. Better yet, we should look at people individually and see what they can do. I'm with the governor all the time. The governor is sharp as a tack and keeps a very rigorous schedule. There is no reason that there should be an age limit put on anybody who is equipped to do the job.
Tally, could you explain your position on that?
Yes, absolutely, Skylar. The age limit in South Carolina for judges, the mandatory retirement age, is 72. And I haven't heard the governor complain about that or challenge that or seek to raise it or lower it or eliminate it. And all we're seeking to do is make our laws consistent. If 72 is the retirement age for a judge, shouldn't it also be the retirement age for the people who appoint the judge? If 72 is too old to interpret the law, is it not too old to make the law? Now, this is actually a bipartisan issue. 73% of South Carolinians support age limits, and 75% of those who were surveyed were Republicans. And this is not about discriminating against our senior citizens. This is about passing the torch to the new generation. This is about eliminating politicians who become so calcified in politics that they lose touch with their electorate. This is about giving the young people of our state leaders who they can relate to and who can relate to them, communicate with them, and listen to them. This is about a new generation of leadership in South Carolina, and that's what Joe Cunningham and I will offer you.
Well, I do agree that this is bipartisan because Sheriff Leon Locke, a Democrat who endorsed our campaign, was very offended by the fact that somebody would think that in just 3 short years, he wouldn't be capable to do the job he's doing today.
Casey, next one for you as well. There's several efforts have surfaced to overhaul how officials are appointed. Joe Cunningham has endorsed popular, nonpartisan election of judges. On the Republican side, there are efforts growing to make school board races partisan. Do you support both of these? Why is one better than the other? Why support one and not both? What is your position?
Skylar, this is an issue that I think takes some looking at, and it just, I think it depends on what your priorities are. The popular election of judges is one way to handle that, and I think it's a good idea. South Carolina is one of the very few states that appoint judges the way we do, or have them elected by the legislature. Ultimately, it comes down to what your priorities are and how you look at the issue.
So, I think everything that we have can always be improved on, right? And we should take a hard look at how we're doing. Tally is right. We're only one of 2 states that elect judges in the way we do. And, that would be something for the General Assembly to look at. As far as partisanship when it comes to running for other offices like mayors and school boards, the days of Ronald Reagan are long gone, when Democrats and Republicans were really just a very few talking points away from what they truly believed in. I think it's not fair for people who are electing, for parents, especially in our school boards. We've seen what an amazing impact COVID has had on parents getting involved in school boards. And the decisions that are made at those levels. I hear parents say all the time, I never realized why I should be sitting at a school board meeting instead of at a football game on Friday night, right? Those meetings should be just as well attended. I think we have to let our parents know where everybody stands that comes into office, that are going to be making decisions for them and their families.
Lieutenant Governor Evatt, we're talking about domestic violence problems, skyrocketing drug overdose deaths, on top of a mental health care system that just can't keep up with it. What do you believe is causing this crisis, and how can we fix it in South Carolina?
So that's a great question, Gavin. Thank you so much. The governor has put a lot of focus on mental health. In our last cabinet meeting, he had Robbie Kern with HHS do a deep dive. We know that mental health is an issue, especially in light of COVID. Kids not being able to be with peers, people not being able to interact with each other. The governor has pulled out all the stops. We know the only way to keep our children safe in the classroom isn't just with having a school resource officer in a building, it's to have a mental health counselor in every building. So what he has done is he has taken money that is put aside in DHHS, and he's doubling the amount of pay for mental health workers within our schools, giving school districts the option to either hire them directly or hire them through HHS. We feel that this combined together will catch mental health problems at their earliest stages. That's what we want to see happen here in South Carolina. We know we have a problem. We need more inpatient facility. We see that in our hospitals. As I traveled the state, being in the upstate, being at St. Francis, they talked about sometimes having to have mental health patients that are in crisis sit in their emergency rooms for days. The same thing with MUSC Children's Hospital. That's something we need to work on here in our state, and I think the governor's doing a great job moving that ball forward and getting the conversation started.
Gotcha. Tally?
I would have to disagree with the statement that the governor is doing a great job related to anything regarding health care. South Carolina has one of the worst healthcare systems in the country, and it's time for us to do something about it. And whatever Governor McMaster has done on the eve of an election, well, what has he been doing for the past 5 years? Yes, we have a mental health care crisis, and mental health should be addressed. We also need to expand Medicaid so that hundreds of thousands of South Carolinians have access to health insurance. This is not just a health issue, but it's also an economic issue. We're talking about creating 40,000 new jobs by expansion of Medicaid, and it will be paid for 95% by the federal government. And these are our tax dollars. This is money we've already spent, and it's going to insure people in other states. By not opting in, the governor is just playing politics here. Politics with people's lives in some cases. And so it's time for us to expand Medicaid and to offer South Carolinians more freedom to keep themselves healthy, whether it's physical health or mental health.
So, 4 years ago, we had this exact same question come up, and I stand by what I said then. You talk to other states who have expanded Medicare. They are not doing well with it. It's not really a fair statement to say that it's free money coming from the federal government. That money has to be paid back. The state funds approximately 6 major things. We fund K through 12, we fund higher education, we fund roads. What out of that list of critical things will we take away to now shift money to Medicaid, right? I've heard in their ads that they want to eliminate income tax. The numbers just don't add up. As an accountant, you can't eliminate tax, you can't increase Medicaid, and you can't keep all the vital things that are happening in South Carolina going. It just doesn't add up.
I need to respond to that.
I'm sorry, you can't. But you can do it in this question if you want to. Tally, a question to you is about how comfortable you are with marijuana becoming decriminalized, legalized, or legalized for medical use, similar to what has been proposed in Senator Tom Davis's bill that passed the Senate this year.
Yes, very quickly on the healthcare issue. Mike Pence expanded Medicare in Indiana. I mean, we're one of the only states that haven't done this. And to talk about funding roads, the governor is not spending money on roads. Our roads are last. We are last in the country in roads. And we currently have a surplus in the budget of $1 billion. And so the cost of expanding Medicaid from the state's perspective, that 5% that we would pay, it only takes 10% of that surplus. And so we can do this and we should do this. Now, on your question, Gavin, about marijuana, absolutely. Joe and I believe that marijuana should be legalized, both medical and recreational. And this is not a controversial issue. More than half of South Carolinians believe that marijuana should be legalized recreationally. And over 90% of South Carolinians believe that medical marijuana should be legalized. That bill that you were talking about would have been passed if it weren't for the governor's interference. There are 39 other states who have already done this, and they are reaping the benefits from revenue. They've eliminated the tax waste and the waste of police resources in going after people for possession. And in addition, we want to expunge the records of those who have convicted of simple possession so that those individuals can reunite their familial ties, so that they can get a job, so that they can get a school loan, and so that they can have a second chance at life.
Thank you, Tally. Lieutenant Governor, question about medical marijuana, legalization of marijuana, decriminalizing marijuana.
So the governor was very clear. He would be willing to sit down and look into medical uses for marijuana. He also said he would like to sit down with law enforcement, as law enforcement would bear the biggest brunt of making sure that this new law would be enforced properly. When it comes to recreational, it has never yielded. And in talking to lieutenant governors in states that have legalized recreational marijuana, it has never yielded the revenues that it has said it would. And the collateral effects of what has happened through recreational marijuana, we're seeing every day. Tent cities, homelessness, people suffering from severe depression. Unfortunately, it affects the marginal areas, our at-risk areas, more so than it affects, our cities and our suburbs. Is this something we want to do? This is not something that we need to be cutting edge on. I think this is something we have to look and see what other states have done well, what other states regret that they've done. I read an article, again, unfortunately I read a lot of articles, right, that people send me, but the House and Senate members that introduced the marijuana legalization bill in Colorado came back and said if they could do it all over again, they probably wouldn't.
Scholar.
Inflation remains, this is for the governor again, inflation remains at a near 40-year high. What specific policies or actions do you support to make life better while South Carolinians are getting pinched and stay within the state's boundaries? What should the state be doing to address inflation?
So, when you talk about staying in the state boundaries, unfortunately, a lot what happens at the federal government has to be handled here in the state. We keep bringing in great paying jobs to South Carolina. During COVID, I am so proud of the way this administration led our state through that. And what it showed is that we gave our businesses the tools to keep their employees safe. We kept them running. We had amazing companies like BMW. Their outgoing president told me directly that in 2020 they had record revenues, and they attributed that to the wonderful handling of the state during that time. You know, the best thing we can do is keep creating an economy with good paying jobs that keep South Carolinians employed. You know, we have the best technical college system in the country, and I know if you hear the governor and I speak anywhere, we talk about it. It's making sure that we educate our kids in knowing that our technical colleges are not a second-tier option anymore, and that the careers that come out of them are good paying jobs and great careers.
Inflation is a serious issue, and it's something that all of us are thinking about. And there are things that the state can do to help its citizens. If you consider some of the the CPI is calculated using housing, medical care, and education as some of the biggest factors in calculating it. And we can do things to reduce those here in South Carolina. And our platform includes reductions in those. For housing, for affordable housing, South Carolina has the highest eviction rate, one of the highest eviction rates in the country. And Henry McMaster refused to spend the housing assistance, the $271 million of housing assistance that we received during the pandemic, quickly enough so that we missed out on additional federal funds for people who are facing eviction. In addition, he put more restrictions on housing assistance, the South Carolina Low Income Tax Credit, so that less people can take advantage of that. Joe and I also want to raise the minimum wage in South Carolina. South Carolina has no minimum wage, and $7.25 just isn't enough. It's just not a living wage, especially in these inflationary times. Joe and I want to raise it to $12. We want to put more money in your pocket.
So, you know, we really don't need a state minimum wage when you have a thriving economy. I don't know anybody in the state of South Carolina that can attract an employee at $7.25 an hour. It's a very out of touch statement. You know, I travel the state every week, and I sit down with businesses. And we talk about good paying jobs. Literally, in Charleston, we have the boating manufacturers. They are paying $28 an hour, and they could hire 250 people today. All they ask is that you could read a tape measure and use a drill. That is a great paying job, yielding benefits and time off and everything else we need. That is the same story that's happening all around the state. I would like somebody to show me one place, except maybe a mom and pop coffee shop, that could get away with paying a high school student $7.25 an hour.
Let's talk about goals and accomplishments. First for Casey. Name 2 actions that you believe fall within the limited authority of the office you are seeking that you would like to accomplish if you were elected.
Absolutely, Skylar. I see the role as the Lieutenant Governor for me as the opportunity to be both an ambassador and an advocate. As ambassador for the state, I would work with the governor's economic cabinet members in promoting the new leadership in the state and in attracting cutting-edge businesses, as well as working with our existing businesses, both large and small, to attract and recruit a workforce and to manage growth. And as an advocate, I want to advocate for those who, from my experience and perspective, are underrepresented or who don't have a voice. And for me, that includes veterans and women. Veterans in this state often have injuries that we cannot see, and they often face financial insecurity. And I want to work in order to educate and give access for them to health care and assistance, to include such options as the veteran treatment courts, which have proven to have great success rates and reduced recidivism. As for women, I think that the women of South Carolina need a champion, and there are issues that need to be addressed in this state. And that includes access to childcare, that includes freedom from violence, that includes workplace inequity, and of course, reproductive care. And I want to be a role model for girls to show that you can be anything you want to be, whether that's a lieutenant colonel or lieutenant governor.
And Governor, can you point to 2 accomplishments you have made in office that better the lives of South Carolinians?
Yes, thank you so much. You know, I love my role as lieutenant governor. I work hand in hand with the governor, travel around the state sitting with businesses. And it's amazing to be able to sit with businesses coming out of business because you completely understand what they're going through. The pressure of having to sign the front of a paycheck and not the back of a paycheck is getting harder and harder every day. Making sure that our children, so the first part of that question, let me get back to, is being there for business. A lot of times government gets so big that people don't know where to go for help. So it's great to be out there. You know, the governor and myself, we fully believe that you can't solve any problem sitting behind a desk in Columbia. It's getting out there and talking to businesses, feeling and finding out what their pains are and getting them fixed back in Columbia. I also love dealing with kids, love going to schools and talking to teachers and students. The best thing is when they come into the Capitol. When third graders come through and walk through the Capitol, I love that they see a woman in this position. To let girls know that nothing holds them back. You know, I'm blessed that I had 3 older brothers and an amazing father who always told me that I could be anything I wanted to be as long as I was willing to work hard enough to do it. I love talking to kids about the opportunities in South Carolina, knowing that we're building Dreamliners in Charleston and we're building F-16 fighter planes in the upstate that keep our allies safe. We're building more BMWs here in South Carolina than anywhere in the world. South Carolina's fingerprints are shaping our world.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Let's just start about your backgrounds and just talking about where you've all come from. Lieutenant Governor, I know you've been in office for 4 years now, but you were from relative obscurity before that. Do you have any interest in becoming governor one day of your own?
You know, I love serving, and I love serving in my role. I will do whatever I can do to make this state, this country, and this world better for my children and my children's children.
And tell me about you.
I want Joe Cunningham to be governor. That's why I joined this ticket. When I met him and I realized his vision, his ideals, and that ours were aligned, I was very excited to support him on this ticket. But of course, what comes with this job is the ability to be ready to be governor on day one. And I believe that I have the skills and the background to do that. You know, I'm the CEO of a company, of a law firm, and so I understand what it's like to face challenges for recruiting, retention, with the high cost of living, the high cost of benefits. I've dealt with all of those issues and I understand them. As a lawyer, of course, it's my job to solve other people's problems. And so I know how to listen, I know how to analyze, I know how to look at an issue from all different directions, and I know how to negotiate. And then, of course, as a fighter pilot for over a dozen years, I was challenged to exercise leadership in a unique way, which meant that I often had to make very efficient and effective decisions, frequently when people's lives were on the line, and using real skill in solving those problems. And so I think I bring a combination of skills to the role that I'm very excited to implement, and I'm very excited for a Cunningham-Casey administration.
So Talia, sticking with you, I want to ask you, just how can you entice someone from the Republican Party to vote for the Democratic Party, specifically y'all's platform? What's the selling point there for people?
You know, Gavin, throughout this campaign, I have talked to so many Republicans who come up to me and say, I'm a diehard Republican, but I'm voting for you and Joe. And that's happened over and over and over. And I think it's for many different reasons. I mean, on the one hand, Joe is known for being one of the most effective and bipartisan leaders in Congress. He knows how to reach across the aisle. He knows how to talk to people. And he doesn't care who takes credit when he does the right thing. Remind me of your question.
It's how you can attract someone from the opposite party to vote for y'all.
Yeah. So also, you know, our platform includes the elimination of the state income tax. I mean, that too is an issue that, you know, I think that many people can get behind, especially Republicans. We also want to, you know, the legalization of marijuana. That's something that many South Carolinians want. In fact, you know, it's been a Republican who's been pushing that in the General Assembly. And our schools and our healthcare system, I mean, anyone who's pro-business knows that in order to recruit businesses to this state, we've got to be able to offer them an educated workforce, and we've got to be able to offer them adequate health care, and we certainly have to offer them better roads than the roads we have today. South Carolina is last, dead last in roads in the country.
Lieutenant Governor Eva, your pitch to Democrats to try and get them to vote for the Republican Party.
Well, I think we don't have to really look too hard. Unfortunately, everything that's happened with this Democrat-held administration, the Biden administration, has put such pressure on not just the entire country, but on South Carolinians. The price of gas is doubling. And as I travel around the state, people not knowing how they're going to fill up their gas tank the next week. How, when they go to the grocery store, their grocery store bills have doubled. And then worrying about what's going to happen this fall and winter when the price of energy continues to go up and up. So really, to talk about what we have done here, creating jobs, making sure we offer great paying jobs, looking here at the state and how we are doing it right here. What's happening in D.C. is the wrong direction. And the way South Carolinians are being handled, like their everyday, their jobs, their schools, the fact that we listen to them and the fact that we're giving a great career path to their children is the way to go.
Governor, we recently experienced a hurricane hitting. All the scientific evidence from everyone looking at just what happened, it was fueled by greatly increased water temperatures. Do you believe global warming is a man-made effect? And what would you do to better solidify South Carolina's coast against what everyone says is going to be an increase in the frequency of these kind of storms?
Well, I believe the climate has been changing, and the climate has been changing since it's been being tracked. This governor has done so much to look at coastal erosion. You know, he was the first governor in the country to start the Floodwater Commission. He brought, General Tom Mulliken to head that, to do a study on what we could do here in our state to help stop flooding. I was with that team, the SC7, off the coast of Charleston, putting in artificial reefs with equipment to monitor what's happening. The governor has taken this very seriously. He's also created the Office of Resiliency to make sure that we're looking at all things as it is with climate and coastal erosion and how things are done here in South Carolina, how we're looking to mitigate some of those problems, because it is a problem. We see it time and time again when storms come in. Everybody asks me all the time, like, what could we do? What can we do? How do we be part of the solution? Very simple for everybody watching. And I'm going to do a shameless plug for my Grab a Bag initiative. As the governor and I were out in areas that continuously flood, it was amazing to see just how much debris that got into water culverts and canals that really attributed to a lot of those flooding in those neighborhoods. So it's something we can all take a part in, and we can all make an impact here in our state.
First of all, it's important for us to realize that climate change is real. And Joe and I will follow the science. Conservation should be a bipartisan issue, and it really is here in South Carolina. I was at the Green Tide Luncheon just a few weeks ago and saw leaders and business leaders and politicians from both sides of the aisle focused on keeping South Carolina's natural beauty intact. Joe Cunningham has a great record on this. In fact, he passed a bill to stop offshore drilling, and Governor McMaster came to the press conference to celebrate that bill being passed. In addition, one of the bills that Joe got passed through a divided Congress and signed into law by President Trump is called the Great American Outdoors Act, and it is known as the Holy Grail of conservation legislation. It's one of the most significant pieces of legislation in the past half decade. South Carolina is a beautiful state, and we all know that. And we need to protect its natural resources. And you can certainly depend on Joe Cunningham and I to do that.
Follow up, this is another area. President Biden recently pushed to excuse or forgive up to $10,000, $20,000 worth of student loans. potentially 1 million people in South Carolina could be affected by that. South Carolina was also one of the states that sued to prevent this from happening. Which side do you fall on? Do you favor what the president was doing, or do you favor the lawsuit that was filed by the state of South Carolina?
That's you, Tally.
Oh, that's me. Student debt really is an issue here in South Carolina. And sometimes it is a barrier to education for a lot of students. Not only the rising cost of higher education, but also the predatory lending practices. And Joe and I have a plan to address those issues, including fully funding the Hope, Life, and Palmetto Fellowship scholarships, and also reforming some of the restrictions on those scholarships that make it impossible for students to either become eligible for the scholarships or to keep them. We want our students here in South Carolina to have successful careers in their higher education, and we want to make it easier for them to get there, to pay for it, and then when they leave, to not have to be burdened by excessive amounts of student debt.
So, as I travel around the state, I've talked to many people, our plumbers, our electricians, our truck drivers, who didn't go to college and who don't feel it's right to be paying off the college debt of people who chose, by their own choice, to go into the careers that they sought. Now, it's been said, and I think it's a great phrase that's been coined, that if you felt the education you were going for was worth having, then it's worth paying for. And I think we cannot continue to strap other people with burdens. As a parent, responsibility is something I've taught my kids from a very young age. When you put your name on a document and you give your word that you're going to pay it back, that's exactly what you should do.
Lieutenant Governor, I want to go to you. President Donald Trump reformed federal drug sentencing guidelines for nonviolent drug offenders. Both South Carolina, but still South Carolina's remain on the books, something that law experts say contribute to racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Would you support legislation like H. 3623, which passed the House and eliminated mandatory minimums for drug sentences and reduced sentences for criminals of no parole offenses?
So, this is kind of a slippery slope. If we knew that what people were in prison for is exactly what they were first arrested for, I think when you blanketly pardon people and you try to blanketly say that somebody did this crime and they should get out, are we really doing right by the citizens as we let them out of jail? Do I believe everybody's entitled to a second chance? Absolutely. Brian Sterling, head of our correctional facility, has done a great job with second chances. I work with him directly as I travel around the state, and people look for a workforce, which everybody is looking for now. When you have a thriving economy, people who once were never looked at by corporations now become part of the equation. And so we have done a wonderful job bringing corporations into our prison systems, getting people trained while they're in prison, and then having companies actually guarantee them a job when they come out. So I think there's other things we can do to help reform. I just think blanket forgiveness of anything when we don't really know what somebody was in prison for, initially arrested for, which I know is kind of a complex topic, just doesn't sit right with me as a mother.
Tally.
I want to touch on something you said, and that's racial inequity in sentencing and in the effect of convictions. When you consider South Carolina and the disparity that a Black person experiences from birth, if a child is born to a Black mother, that mother is 3.5 times more likely to die after childbirth. Then the child, once they enter elementary school, is almost 4 times more likely to be disciplined, to be sent to detention or even suspended simply because they're Black. An MUSC study had showed shocking results, even when they controlled for other factors. And then, as an adult, a black person is 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for possession of marijuana than a white person, even though the usage rates are the same. And then the convictions and the sentencing are higher for non-white individuals. You know, part of Joe's platform is he intends to expunge the records of simple possession convictions so that those individuals can go get a job, so that they can get a mortgage, so they can pay for school, and get a second chance at life.
Gotcha.
So, you know, the governor has looked at that. That is something we've looked at, about how do we end up taking maybe a child in an at-risk area that's born to a single mother, and how do we get them to the level they need to be? You know, I sit on the Hunt Keene Institute Fellowship out of DC, and we talked about this, right? There is a huge disparity going into kindergarten. And what the governor has done is to put money towards 4K education for people who would not be able to afford otherwise. Because we know that narrowing that gap going into kindergarten is good for our students, and it's good for our state, and it helps our parents.
And Tali, this will be the last question. It'll be a minute each for you. A lack of childcare is a main reason some 4.8 million people nationwide can't get a job. This according to the Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey. Well, what can be done in South Carolina to make childcare more accessible and affordable to folks?
Childcare is a real issue for women in South Carolina, for families, in fact. I mean, childcare work is hard, the pay is low, and there is a really high turnover rate. So making childcare accessible can really be a game changer for families. And Joe and I have a plan to do that, and it includes using something that is similar to the wages program in North Carolina, where you supplement the pay of childcare workers in addition to expanding 4K and making it truly universal, not just for at-risk young people. And in addition, having childcare centers that are like community health centers that include some support. And this will require partnerships, public-private partnerships, and investment of some resources. But the health of women that really is so important to this state. I mean, the measure of success for any community, for any state, is dependent upon the strength and the health of women, and this will help them.
Lieutenant Governor.
So here in South Carolina, we have a wonderful program called First Steps. And First Steps goes and reaches out into the community to help moms, single moms, not single moms, deal with this exact issue. And not only do they help find adequate child care for those children, but they also help put that mother in touch with resources that are available within our state to help make their lives easier. Whether it's helping connect them with to get them a job, whether it's trying to help them find affordable housing, whether it's trying to help them seek medical attention that they may need for themselves or their children. First Steps is an amazing program. And where we're seeing it pop up, in our technical colleges. First Steps is popping up in our technical colleges so that young moms, you know, maybe not so young, but have young kids.
Sorry, we have to jump out. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thank you for everyone for tuning in tonight. I'm Gavin Jackson. Good night.